Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are taking a shovel to what is probably one of the most critical 7-year stretches in history.
Absolutely.
We're looking at the period between 1757 and 1765, and in this really short window, the entire political and economic reality of India just completely shifted.
It's incredible how fast it happened. You have the British East India Company, basically a group of merchants who are, obsessed with avoiding taxes.
Right, that's their whole deal.
That's their whole deal, and they transformed themselves, almost overnight it seems, into the absolute political authority in one of the world's wealthiest regions, Bengal.
It's such a foundational event, and what makes it so fascinating to me is how quickly these commercial grievances just spiraled into political conquest.
Exactly. We're tracing that path from tax avoidance to full-blown empire, and we're
Yeah.
focusing entirely on Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa.
And we really want to extract the key steps, right? The early privileges, the political conspiracies, and of course the two huge military milestones, Plassey and Buxar. Our mission here is to go beyond that simple narrative of, the British won, they took over. It's so much more complex. We want to unpack the specific economic mechanisms.
Especially the misuse of the trade passes.
Yes, exactly. How they systematically drained the local economy and, frankly, provided the pretext for war. And then we have to understand the absolutely devastating dual system that resulted from it all.
And you can't understand any of it unless you start by appreciating the prize. I mean, Bengal wasn't just wealthy, it was a global economic powerhouse.
A powerhouse is the right word. The sources we're looking at call it the jewel of India, the richest province.
And for good reason. It was responsible for a huge share of the global trade in textiles, silks, saltpeter.
There's this fantastic description in the source material from a European traveler, and it just perfectly captures how attractive it was.
Oh, I know the one you mean.
He said Bengal was a place with 100 gates open for entrance, but not one for departure.
It just sucks you in. And it was a massive net exporter of resources, which is why all the European trading companies, the Dutch, the French, the English, they were all just desperate for a permanent foothold there.
And I think it's important to set this up right from the start. We all know the famous Battle of Plassey in 1757. It's often seen as the starting gun of the conquest.
It is, but it's vital to understand that this conquest wasn't fueled by some grand ideological desire for empire, not at first.
No.
It was driven purely by conflicts over business, over taxation, and over trade. The politics were just a consequence of the commercial greed.
Okay, let's unpack this. To really get the 7-year conquest, we have to rewind. We need to go back nearly a century to see how the British managed to set up a commercial foothold that was so disproportionately advantageous that, war became inevitable.
The initial footing was actually quite small. In 1651, the English East India Company gets permission to establish its first factory.
And a factory back then isn't what we think of today. It's a fortified trading post.
Exactly. A warehouse, offices, and walls. And they set it up at Hooghly. This was granted by Sultan Shuja, who was the governor of Bengal at the time.
And this permission leads us to what historians call the Big Deal of 1651, which, again, wasn't a military victory. It was just a phenomenal piece of negotiation that laid the economic foundation for the next 100 years of conflict.
It was an unbelievable transaction. I mean, truly. Sultan Shuja grants the English the privilege of free trade.
So 0 customs duties, 0 taxes.
0 for all their official imports and exports across the 3 wealthiest provinces, Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa.
And the cost? What was the price for this massive commercial advantage?
This is the crazy part.
Yeah.
A single, upfront, one-time payment of only 3,000 rupees.
3,000 rupees.
Right.
For a tax waiver across 3 provinces, even accounting for inflation, that sounds criminally cheap. What was their business already worth at that point?
It was already substantial. The sources show that British export value from Bengal alone was already exceeding 50,000 pounds sterling a year. So that tiny 3,000 rupee fee was effectively waiving taxes on hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of trade every single year, a figure that just compounded over time. It was, as the source says, an amazing deal.
It gave them an immediate, just overwhelming competitive advantage over every other merchant in the region.
Including, and this is key, the local Indian traders.
So from 1651, the company has this commercial engine that's fundamentally untaxed. It's building these immense profit margins that local merchants just couldn't possibly hope to match. But they didn't stop at tax exemption, did they? They started acquiring land, too.
Precisely. By 1698, they leveraged their growing influence to acquire zamindari rights.
And we should be really clear about what zamindari means. It's not just land ownership.
No, not at all. It was the right to act as a landlord and, most importantly, the right to collect taxes from everyone living and working in those villages. They got it for 3 key villages: Sutanudi, Kalakaka, and Gubandapur.
So this sounds like a huge political scale jump. They went from being tax-exempt traders to suddenly being local tax collectors and landlords.
It was a crucial evolution. By getting these rights, they began to create a real administrative base. They immediately certified these new territories, and in 1700 they named the whole compound Fort William,
Which would become Calcutta.
the heart of Calcutta.
Yep.
So they had moved from pure commerce to possessing territory, military defenses, and actual local political authority.
And this status, this kind of special privilege, was cemented even further when the declining central Mughal power in Delhi confirmed these rights.
Yes. In 1717, the Mughal Emperor Farrukh Shah officially confirmed all the tax-free trade privileges and the zamindari rights. And by this point, the economic engine was just running at full tilt.
I mean, the sheer volume of goods we're talking about.
Yeah.
Cotton, fine silks, saltpeter for gunpowder.
It was immense. It meant that Bengal's products comprised the staggering 60% of all English imports arriving from Asia.
60%.
60. So Bengal wasn't just profitable, it was the essential financial pillar of the entire East India Company's global operation.
Now, this raises a really important question. You've got this timeline of nearly 70 years where the local rulers, the Nawabs of Bengal, are watching 60% of the company's most lucrative trade leave their province completely exempt from state taxation.
A massive hemorrhage of state revenue.
Exactly. So how long could they possibly tolerate that before they decided that the original deal from 1651 had to be revoked?
And that's the core tension that makes the 1750s inevitable. The local rulers finally realized they were being systematically exploited, and that brings us to the rise of these strong Nawabs who tried to reassert their sovereignty.
The central Mughal power was getting weaker and weaker.
Right, which allowed local governors to become functionally independent. Rashid Quli Khan started this trend, and he was followed by Alivardi Khan, who ruled very strongly from 1740.
And Alivardi Khan, he was acutely aware of the danger, wasn't he? He saw what these fortified trading companies represented.
Oh, absolutely. He refused to let the European powers strengthen their force. He famously said that if he allowed them, they would eventually turn the tables on him. He saw the future with perfect clarity.
Unfortunately, that strength didn't last. In 1756, Alivardi Khan died, and he passed the throne to his grandson, Siraj-ud-Dowlah.
Who was inexperienced and, critically, very young.
So he didn't just inherit a throne, he inherited this incredibly hostile environment. It was populated by internal enemies who were just ready to exploit his instability.
The sources identify 3 major internal factions who saw Siraj's youth as a golden opportunity to weaken the central authority.
Who were they?
First, you had Ghasseti Begum, a powerful relative who challenged his right to the throne. Second, Jagat Seth. And he wasn't just a banker.
No, he was the financial power broker in Bengal, maybe in all of India. His support was crucial to the state.
Absolutely. And third, you have Mir Jafar, who was Siraj's own army chief.
So if you have your army chief and your central banker working against you, your reign is already on incredibly shaky ground.
It's precarious from day one. And this internal weakness was the perfect environment for the British to escalate the core economic conflict, the aggressive misuse of the farman.
Okay, let's clarify those terms one more time for everyone. The farman was the original 1717 imperial decree, the one from the Mughal emperor.
Right, the one that granted the company its official tax exemption.
And the dastaks.
The dastaks were the physical official passes that were issued under that decree to exempt specific shipments of company goods from duties, like a customs waiver form for each boatload.
But the abuse of these dastaks was widespread and systematic.
Absolutely. The official company trade might have been tax exempt, but the critical abuse was that individual company officials were using those same dastaks, those official tax-free passes, for their own enormous private side businesses.
So this wasn't about the company's profit anymore. This was about personal enrichment.
Completely. They would trade in lucrative inland goods like salt, betel nut, tobacco, and by using the official pass, they paid nothing to the Nawab, which instantly undercut every single local Indian merchant who was required to pay duties.
So it's not just tax evasion. It's basically economic warfare. It's designed to destroy the local competition and redirect the entire flow of internal revenue into the pockets of private company employees.
Exactly. The local Indian merchants, who were often financing the Nawab's treasury through their taxes, were being ruined. and the Nawab was losing his essential government income. Siraj-ud-Dowlah saw this as an existential threat that had to be stopped.
But when he tried to regulate this, the British met his attempts with outright defiance and direct provocation. What were the flashpoints?
There were several intentional insults, all designed to undermine Siraj's authority. First, they gave shelter to a fugitive named Krishna Das, who had fled with a large portion of the state treasury, a huge affront.
A massive insult.
Second, they openly supported the rebellious Ghaseti Begum against Siraj. But the immediate, the non-negotiable cause for war was the British decision to strengthen the fortifications around Fort William without asking for the Nawab's permission.
Right. That move, building up military defenses in someone else's territory, it's the ultimate statement of sovereignty. It told Siraj that the British no longer recognized his authority within his own domain.
So Siraj had to react. He attacked and he captured Fort William in June of 1756.
And that successful capture leads directly to the incident that became the English justification for the entire ensuing war, the Black Hole tragedy.
Yes, the story became instant political gold for the company.
What was the official story they pushed?
The claim was that after capturing the fort, 146 English prisoners were crammed into a tiny 18 by 14-foot room, a dungeon really meant for maybe 2 or 3 people.
On a stifling summer night.
And that most of them suffocated, with only 26 surviving the ordeal.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because modern historical analysis has often questioned the precise number of casualties, the exact details.
But the exact truth of the event is almost secondary to its immediate political utility.
That's the key.
Absolutely. Regardless of whether it was 146 people or fewer who died, the English used this incident brilliantly and ruthlessly as propaganda.
It transformed the whole conflict.
It did. It changed it from an ugly, messy fight over commercial privilege into a moral crusade. It framed Siraj-ud-Dowlah as this cruel, monstrous tyrant, which then justified a massive military response from Madras, led by Robert Clive. It was the perfect pretext to deploy overwhelming force.
And Clive arrived, and he didn't just bring military might, he brought a strategy that prioritized bribery and treachery over actual fighting.
His immediate goal wasn't a big battle. It was just to regain Calcutta as cheaply as possible. So he bribed Manik Chand, the officer Surajad had left in charge.
And Calcutta fell quickly.
Very quickly. Siraj-ud-Dowlah was then compelled to sign the humiliating Treaty of Alinagar in February 1757. It restored all the tax-free privileges, demanded massive compensation, and, crucially, allowed the British to continue fortifying Calcutta.
But the British understood that any temporary agreement with Siraj was fundamentally unstable. They knew they needed him gone, permanently, and replaced by a puppet who owed them everything.
And this is where the great Plassey conspiracy is formed. Clive enters into this detailed, secret arrangement with the key domestic traders.
So Mir Jafar, the army chief.
Jagat Seth, the banker who controlled the purse strings.
And Amir Chand, the wealthy merchant.
The deal was pure transaction. Mir Jafar would ensure the main Bengal army would not fight during the confrontation, and in return, Clive would install him as the new Nawab.
Which brings us to the infamous Battle of Plassey on June 23, 1757. And you're right to emphasize the quotation marks around battle.
It was less a battle and more a highly scripted performance of betrayal. Siraj arrived with this enormous army of 50,000 soldiers. Clive had only about 3,000.
The numbers sound impossible until you realize that Mir Jafar commanded the vast majority of that 50,000-man force.
That's right. The sources do note that a small, loyal corps under commanders like Mir Madan and Mohan Lal did attempt to fight bravely.
But it was a futile effort.
Completely. Once Mir Madan was killed, Siraj made the fatal mistake of seeking counsel from his treacherous commander, Mir Jafar.
Who advised him to withdraw and leave the battle to him.
Exactly. The moment Siraj fled the field, Mir Jafar's massive contingent of the army simply stood still. They did nothing.
And the small British force won easily, decisively, without ever facing the main bulk of the Nawab's army.
Siraj was later captured and executed by Mir Jafar's son. It was over.
The historical consensus on this is just crystal clear. This was not a conquest of arms. It was a revolution engineered by powerful local elites who calculated that a British-backed puppet would better serve their financial interests than their own sovereign.
It was a political transfer facilitated by cash.
Yeah.
There's a historian's quote that just perfectly encapsulates this. Plassey was a transaction in which the rich bankers of Bengal and Mir Jafar sold out the Nawab to the English.
It makes perfect sense. But let's look at the financial consequences of this transaction. beyond simply installing a puppet Nawab, Mir Jafar, what were the immediate game-changing material gains for the company?
The benefits were immediate, and they were overwhelming. First, Robert Clive becomes governor of Bengal and, overnight, an instant millionaire from the gifts.
Right.
Second, the company secured undisputed permanent free trade across all 3 provinces, no more negotiating. Third, company officials were given official sanction to continue their private, tax-free trade using the DOS tax.
So the abusive system was now official policy.
Cemented into place. And then you have the land and cash prizes.
What did they get?
The company acquired the zamindari rights to the entire 24 Parganas region, a huge tract of land. But the instant financial windfall was just enormous. Mir Jafar paid a colossal 50 lakh rupees.
A truly immense sum.
As gifts and bribes to Clive and other company officials. It instantly replenished their pockets and financed all of their future campaigns. And on top of all that, the French were permanently neutralized and expelled from Bengal.
So Plassey, won entirely by treachery, transforms the British into kingmakers. It wasn't just about gaining territory. It was about gaining control of the vast treasury of Bengal.
And the significance here is that the British Empire's subsequent expansion into the rest of India. It was largely financed by this extracted wealth, not by sending money from London. Plassey was the moment the company ceased being a trading body and became the supreme political and economic power in Bengal.
But the first puppet, Mir Jafar, who the British had derisively nicknamed Clive's Jackal, he quickly discovered that his new role was financially unsustainable.
He was in an impossible situation from the start. His rule only lasted 3 years, from 1757 to 1760.
What were the immediate problems he faced?
Well, he faced rebellious local zamindars who didn't respect his authority. He had to contend with an invasion attempt by the Mughal emperor's son, and his own army was unpaid and restless because the treasury was just perpetually empty. He was entirely reliant on the British military for his own survival.
And that reliance came with an enormous price tag. The British just kept demanding more and more money to cover their expenses, their bribes.
They were draining the Bengal treasury dry, and he knew it. His desperation became acute. He realized he was financially suffocating, so he tried a desperate play for independence.
This is where he secretly plotted with the Dutch, right? The company's main European rival in the region.
Exactly. He tried to get them to help him remove the British presence.
A plot that Clive quickly and brutally crushed, removing the Dutch threat entirely.
Yes. Clive defeated the Dutch forces at the Battle of Badra in 1759, which sealed Mir Jafar's fate. He was clearly unreliable, and more importantly, he had run out of cash to pay his debts.
So the British decided it was time to exchange the puppet for a newer model.
And the replacement was right there. Mir Jafar's ambitious son-in-law, Mir Qasim.
So in 1760, Mir Qasim makes a secret offer to the new governor, Vansittart.
He does. He offers even larger payments and 3 valuable territories, Burdwan, Midnapore, and Chittagong, in exchange for the throne. Mir Jafar was quickly forced to abdicate, and Qasim became the new Nawab.
So the British got fresh territory and more cash. But the twist here, as we know, is that Mir Qasim was not the pliable puppet they were expecting at all.
He was exceptionally capable, and he was committed to genuine sovereignty. He was a serious threat, precisely because he was competent.
He pays his dues first.
Oh, immediately. He pays the massive dues, he hands over the zamindari of the promised territories, but then he sets about systematically reforming and strengthening the administration. He wants to make Bengal solvent and militarily independent, the very opposite of what the company wanted.
He starts by creating operational distance. He moves the capital away from the British power center in Calcutta.
His first move, a brilliant one, was to shift the capital from Murshidabad all the way to Mankar deep in Bihar.
Which is a huge logistical challenge, moving the entire seat of administration.
It's massive. But it was essential. It gave him geographical distance from the pervasive political and military interference coming out of Fort William.
And he didn't stop at administration. He understood that military inferiority was the root cause of the previous failure at Plassey.
Exactly. He starts to modernize his army along European lines. He hires foreign experts. He even establishes local manufacturing units to produce high-quality firearms. He was building a state capable of resisting British aggression.
And he streamlined the state finances to make sure his troops were actually paid on time.
But the central conflict, it just couldn't be ignored. The abuse of the DAS tax by company servants, which had crippled Mir Jafar, was continuing unabated under Qasim.
So we're right back to the same issue. Company officials using force, seizing goods, paying no tax, and brutally suppressing the local merchants who tried to compete.
And Mir Qasim complained fiercely and repeatedly. He actually managed to force Governor Vansittart to agree to a compromise.
What was the compromise?
That the English would pay a small, symbolic 9% tax on their internal trade. But when this compromise reached the Calcutta Council—
The very officials who are profiting directly from the tax evasion.
Exactly. They rejected it outright. They refused to surrender even a fraction of their illegal profit margin. They insisted on their absolute right to tax-free private trade.
And that rejection was the breaking point for Mir Qasim.
It was. So in a bold sovereign act that defied all convention, he decided he wouldn't allow the British to dictate the terms of trade for his own people. In 1763, he unilaterally abolished all inland trade duties for everyone.
For everyone, not just the British.
British, Indian, every merchant. It leveled the economic playing field overnight. By removing all duties, he completely negated the illegal competitive advantage the British enjoyed.
The British must have been furious.
Livid. Their entire system of wealth extraction collapsed instantly. They could not stand the idea of having to compete fairly with local merchants.
So they declared him deposed.
Immediately. And war broke out. Qasim was initially defeated and he fled, but instead of giving up, he managed to form a truly formidable Triple Alliance.
This is himself the powerful Nawab of Awadh Shuja-ud-Dowla.
And the symbolic leader of the subcontinent, the Mughal emperor himself, Shah Alam II.
This powerful alliance sets the stage for the true military showdown that would determine the fate of North India.
This brings us to the Battle of Buxar in 1764, and we absolutely have to contrast it sharply with Plassey. Plassey was a treacherous deal sealed with a minor scuffle. Buxar was a massive, closely contested, real military battle.
On October 22, 1764, you have the combined strength of this Triple Alliance, maybe up to 50,000 soldiers.
And they meet the disciplined British forces under Major Hector Munro. The sources all emphasize that this was a confrontation where superior British organization, training, and firepower proved decisive.
The significance of Buxar is just. It's profound, because it settled the military question that Plassey had avoided.
It did. It established British superiority not through bribery, but through raw martial strength. It proved they could defeat the largest combined forces that North India could muster.
The victory cemented the British as the undisputed masters of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa, and it brought the powerful Nawab of Awadh to the bargaining table, alongside the Mughal emperor himself.
And Robert Clive, who had been away, returns as governor to dictate the terms of peace. This is the Treaties of Allahabad in 1765. He wasn't just negotiating, he was setting the foundation for empire.
Let's break down that first treaty, the one with the Nawab of Awadh, Shuja-ud-Dowla.
Awadh was forced to pay a massive war indemnity of 50 lakh rupees. They had to surrender the districts of Allahabad and Kora.
But crucially, Clive did not annex Awadh. He implemented a much more sophisticated strategic arrangement.
The famous buffer state.
Exactly. Awadh was kept intact, but it was forced to sign what was called a subsidiary alliance.
And this alliance forced the Nawab to pay for British troops to be permanently stationed in his territory. For his protection, of course.
Which makes him perpetually dependent and ensures he can't maintain an independent army of his own.
It does. And the genius of making Awadh a buffer state, rather than annexing it directly, it was pure pragmatism.
What was the logic?
To the west lay the formidable Maratha Confederacy, which was the greatest remaining military power in India. Clive knew that directly annexing Awadh would expose the enormous wealth of Bengal to direct Maratha attack.
So, by keeping Awadh as a seemingly sovereign state, but one controlled by a subsidiary alliance,
the British created a dependent cushion against the Marathas. It allowed them to extract Bengal's wealth in peace. It was a masterful geopolitical move.
And the second treaty was with the supreme but now functionally powerless Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II.
The emperor was taken under British protection. He was given the districts of Allahabad and Kora to live in, making him a figurehead and, critically, a pensioner of the company.
But in return for this protection, the emperor issued the Farman of August 1765.
And this document is the formal, legalistic foundation of the British Empire in India.
It is. The emperor formally granted the East India Company the Diwani of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa.
And let's remind ourselves, Diwani means the right to collect all taxes. It's the key to the treasury and the entire economy. The counterpart, Nizamat, meant the responsibility for military defense, law and order, justice, the actual work of governance.
And this grant of the Diwani created the notorious dual system of administration, which lasted until 1772.
In theory, the division was clean. The company gets the Diwani, the money, and the Nawab of Bengal, Najmuddin, who was Mir Jafar's son, retained the Nizamat, the responsibility for governing.
But in reality, Clive had created a system of power without responsibility.
The sources make it clear that the British immediately undermined the Nawab's administrative function, even in his own Nizamat sphere.
How do they do that?
They forced the young Nawab to surrender his Nizamat functions to a deputy governor, a Naib Subadar, who was secretly nominated and controlled by the company. Clive appointed key figures like Muhammad Reza Khan to these posts, men who were loyal only to the company's revenue goals.
So, if we synthesize the reality of this dual system, the company controlled all the power, the army and the treasury, but had zero accountability for public welfare, justice, or administration.
And the Nawab had all the responsibility for running the government and administering justice, but absolutely no power and no money to execute any of those duties.
It's a fatal divorce of power from duty.
And Clive set this system up meticulously. What's so fascinating here is that the dual system was designed not just for revenue extraction, but also to protect the company from British parliamentary scrutiny.
How so?
By maintaining the guise of a local ruler, the Nawab, administering justice, the company could claim it was merely exercising its trading rights and tax collection privileges. They could pretend they weren't engaging in full political sovereignty, which would have attracted unwanted attention and regulation from London.
This structure was just perfectly optimized for exploitation. It initiated the most destructive period of wealth extraction, what's known as the drain of wealth.
This is where we need to look at the economic accounting, because it's so simple and so brutal. Prior to 1765, if the company wanted to buy silks and cotton in India to sell in London, they had to send gold and silver from England to India to fund those purchases.
They were trading partners, exchanging species for goods.
Right. After 1765, that changed entirely. After acquiring the Diwani, the company simply stopped sending gold and silver from London. They used the massive tax revenue, the Diwani money collected from the people of Bengal, to purchase the very same goods.
They called this money investment, or the company's fund.
Right, but what it meant was they were effectively getting Indian products for free, shipping them to Britain, selling them for enormous profit, and leaving Bengal poorer by the entire value of the goods exported.
They were funding their entire business model using stolen local revenue. This cycle of extraction must have rapidly impoverished Bengal.
The human toll was immediate, and it was catastrophic. The complete neglect of governance, of infrastructure, of administration caused by this dual system, coupled with the financial drain, was a primary factor in the terrible Bengal famine of 1770.
When the famine struck, there was no responsive governmental body. The British had the money but no responsibility, and the Nawab had the responsibility but zero money to initiate relief efforts or store any reserves.
Millions died. And beyond the famine, the tax collection itself became ruthlessly oppressive. The Naib Subadars were under strict orders to maximize revenue at all costs, regardless of the harvest or human need.
It crushed the peasantry.
It forced many to flee their land or become bandits just to survive.
And what happened to the core industries that made Bengal so attractive in the first place? Specifically the weavers and the artisans.
They were systematically destroyed. The company used its absolute political power to enforce a strict monopoly. They forced cotton weavers to sell their finished textiles only to the company, and at ridiculously low, non-negotiable prices. It destroyed their ability to make a living.
And the silk trade was intentionally manipulated to serve British manufacturing interests back home, wasn't it?
It was industrial control by decree. They forced silk weavers to completely stop weaving finished silk fabrics because those competed with textiles made in England.
Right.
And instead focus only on producing raw silk for export to English factories. This was designed to eliminate local competition entirely.
And this immense pressure, this brings us to one of the most specific and just visceral anecdotes that define this robber state period.
The coercion, the mandatory labor, the ruinous terms dictated by the company. They were so severe that, according to documentation, many silk winders chose a desperate, unimaginable form of protest.
They cut off their own thumbs.
They cut off their own thumbs to physically escape being forced to work for the company, knowing they would never be able to handle the delicate threads again. This level of physical self-mutilation to gain economic freedom, it's a perfect, horrifying illustration of the human cost of the dual system.
The historian K.M. Panikkar sums up this period perfectly. He called the years between 1765 and 1772 a robber state, that plundered Bengal indiscriminately. It was a short, destructive period of complete moral bankruptcy.
And that 7-year plunder generated the financial reserves that funded the next 70 years of British expansion across India.
So let's synthesize this whole journey we've taken. We had Plassey, which was the political beginning, and then Buxar, the military confirmation.
And the key distinction is causality. Plassey was a political transaction based on treachery. It gave the British the initial treasury access and that kingmaker status. Buxar was a genuine military victory against a formidable combined force. It decisively sealed the conquest, proving British martial dominance over the major powers of North India.
And we cannot stress this enough. This entire rapid transformation was fundamentally enabled and driven by powerful Indian collaborators.
It was a political revolution driven by domestic factions, the bankers, the merchants, the disgruntled officials, people like the Jagat Seths and Mir Jafar. They weren't necessarily seeking British rule.
No, their goal was a pliant Nawab.
Exactly. A pliable Nawab who would protect their financial interests against a strong, independent ruler like Siraj-ud-Daulah. Their local political maneuvering just happened to align perfectly with the British commercial goal of absolute tax-free trade.
The ultimate outcome by 1765 was a complete reordering of power. The Nawab of Bengal was reduced to a rubber-stamping puppet. The Nawab of Awadh was a financially dependent ally via the subsidiary alliance, and the Mughal emperor himself
Was a British pensioner residing in Allahabad.
The road to central and southern India was wide open, and the entire endeavor was financed.
The subsequent conquest of the Maratha Confederacy, the Mysore Wars against Tipu Sultan, everything was bankrolled by the vast wealth of Bengal extracted through the Diwani and the dual system.
So what does this all mean for us today? It means the foundations of the largest colonial empire in history were not built on the sophisticated economy of Great Britain.
No.
They were built on a 17th century tax loophole and a series of brilliant conspiracies.
It means that the empire was built on stolen revenue. And that leads to a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over.
Go on.
The massive wealth extracted through the dual system and the Diwani was what funded the subsequent push into central and southern India. If Bengal had not been compromised commercially through the Dastak system, and if the conspiracy of Plassey had failed, forcing Clive to send expensive silver and gold from England to finance a prolonged, difficult military campaign, would the later British conquest of the entire subcontinent have even been financially feasible? Or would it have stalled due to a lack of available capital?
It's a huge question.
This entire trajectory hinges on a foundation of tax-free trade and subsequent treasury theft.
It is staggering to consider how an entire empire was built on the collapse of a single wealthy province.
Indeed, a truly comprehensive look at the costs of power without responsibility.
Thank you for joining us as we unpack the British conquest of Bengal. We appreciate you trusting us with your source material.
Join us again next time for another deep dive into the knowledge that matters.